is Saiful Ifan Haris bin Razak, and as for today, I'm going to briefly review a journal that we've been allocated to be read for this past few weeks, which is the Smirnova journal regarding the developmental neurotoxicity challenges in the 21st century in vitro opportunities. So this journal is quite lengthy, so as for today I'm going to cover all of them, and I hope that you can continue to listen. And here with me I have this big green memo pad where I will be putting my small notes into it so that I can briefly talk to you and look at this, So yeah, so Smirnova journal, it is basically about the quick introduction. It is basically about DNT, which is, what is it? It is developmental neurotoxicity test, and worldwide DNT test is probably the least tested health effects of chemicals in the world, because there's roughly 150 substances of chemicals that were tested, and for your information, there's thousands of chemical out there that has not been, ranging from environmental pollutants, industrial chemicals, what else, drugs, food additives, and also consumer products such as cosmetics. And throughout the years, there's only been 6 definitive developmental neurotoxicants, which are methyl-mercury, the infamous methyl-mercury that everyone been aware of due to the outbreak back then in the Minamata River. What else? We have arsenic, toluene, PCBs, ethanol, and also lead. So these 6 chemicals are the definitive one, the chemicals that have been tested and proven to have neurodevelopmental disorder, that can give neurodevelopmental disorder to the ones exposed. And recently there have been some additions towards these groups of the intoxicants, which are, it is quite lengthy, so I'm just gonna read it out. It is manganese, fluoride, chlorpyrifos, dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, tetrachloroethylene, and also the polybrominated diphenyl ethers. This is according to Granjan and Landrigan, which is in 2014. So yeah, this toxicant has been given some concerns towards people around the world due to its devastating effects towards the brain. Most importantly, and especially towards the developing brains of children and kids, it is due to they still haven't developed this fully developed this blood-brain barrier, which is the barrier that prevents the exogenous substance in the blood from entering the brain. Unlike the adult brain have this completely developed the blood-brain barrier, so this substance can be prevented at least from entering the brain. So this is why we often seeing that kids are affected more compared to adults when they are exposed to such chemicals. And note to self that these chemicals can cause permanent damage towards the ones exposed, as they interfere with the developing stages of the neuron cells in the brain. For example, the neurogenesis process that includes maturation, proliferation, and allocations of cells into different parts of the body. So these stages are like very prominent in one's developing stages. So yeah, when once they interfere, the effects is very devastating, and some of the disorder that one can suffer is ADHD, which is the attention deficit hyperactive disorder, learning disabilities. They suffer from low IQ level, so they'll be dumb. And also they can also suffer from autism. This is also this is due to according to the Quen 2010 and Segif et al 2010. So yeah, how it why does it affects more on the developing brain? It is mainly because developing brain most importantly especially from the postnatal and prenatal exposure, it is very crucial. It is because humans have like fixed time frame of allocations of what they need to do, these cells need to do. So any interference from outside, it can cause like the damage that I've stated earlier. So it is very important for parents and also elders to know to take care of their children and youngsters, and try as best as they can to avoid this group of people from the exposure of such chemical or any outbreaks that are related to it. So yeah, this is like a quick introduction of what DNT test is all about and chemicals that are involved in it. So yeah. DNT test. DNT actually stands for Developmental Neuroplasticity Test. It is actually a test conducted way back in 1980s in order to study whether that certain chemicals have any adverse effects towards the developing brains, ranging from the prenatal stage and up to the adult brain. Okay, so the reason why the anti-testing is still like not widely used or tested for the chemicals is mainly because there are yeah, okay. So the reasons why the anti-tests are still not widely like tested for the chemicals is mainly because they lack of data, and most of the data are like entirely based on the in vivo experiment. And as all are aware that in vivo experiments are like very time consuming and they are expensive, and what else, they are not suitable to use to test like a large number of chemicals that we have like thousands of them. So to just imagine like going through each of the chemicals and until the end of the macam nak cakap sampai ke hujung tu pun still tak habis. Just imagine that. It's like never ending. And there's this one fact that it stated that for one chemicals it takes about roughly 3 months to be tested, and it used 1,000 red pops, and also it costs 1.4 millions, and that is just like for one chemical to be tested. Imagine testing for like 2,000 plus chemicals out there, and it is good to test this chemical, but looking back at the budget and the time and the that needed to be put into this test is like, dude, it's like banyak gila lah. Okay. So yeah, in addition to that, if the tests are like performed, the data would be like would be difficult and hard to interpret, and they rarely contribute to the regulation and risk assessment that are widely used throughout the world. So these are the reasons why there are only a few of the chemicals that are conducted, and mostly conducted in like wealthy country, and can't be done everywhere. There's like specific area where they conduct this experiment. And looking back at this cons of this testing, many researchers, including these neurotoxicologists, they gathered and do some conference and a series of workshop and stuff like that to find some like alternative approach to cope with this cons that this test have. We do need this test, but how to like how to counter this lacking, and they came up with like the thoughts, and they came up with the idea of approaching to the fast and reliable DNT testing, which by using like technology of battery of high throughputs battery. So by doing this, it can speed up the speed up and facilitate the output and the outcomes of the experiments. And it's not that these people are lazy or something like that. They have been going through lots of conference and talking about how to cope with it. It's just that it is a matter of time for them to actually find the effective solutions with countering these problems, and by that time we can sit back and see of how these researchers contributes to this testing that can benefit for all. In US alone, 1/6 of children, they suffer from
neurodevelopmental disorder.
Consideration 1, epidemic neurodevelopmental disorder. Every 1/6 of children in US alone, they suffer from neurodevelopmental disorder, and 1 out of 110 children, they suffer from ASD, which is the autism spectrum disorder, and 14% of 4 million children, they suffer from ADHD. So imagine this statistic. Throughout the past decades, the major concerns from out of this disorder is autism, which is the autism spectrum disorder. It is due to it doubled throughout the past decade and quadrupled throughout the past 2 years alone, and that is like very increasing, steeply increasing. So this is actually the major concerns of the worldwide. So what autism can cause is it can diminish one's quality of life. They can't take care of themselves. They need adult care for them to continue living and surviving. So this disorder is quite significant as it increased throughout the years, and and the public has been acknowledging that industrial chemicals and possibility of exposure of drugs are one of the factors that contribute to the increment of this ASD, which is the autism spectrum disorder. And there's this statement by Bondi and Campbell in 2015. They stated that infants that are exposed to the stated chemicals, the infants lost for about 30 IQ points, which is very devastating. And he further stated that if the infants only lost like less than 5 IQ point, the effects would not be that great, but considering 30 IQ points, that's like very tremendous, isn't it? And this is in addition of the widespread exposure. For example, like in addition of the widespread exposure, for example, like the existence of lead in every product that we human like often interact and have something to do with. For example, like the paint, lead from everywhere. It can affect the whole exposure. This is what we call a prolonged exposure. It is not acute, but it takes time, and this can affect the whole population, as population in having the possibility to have the autism. And once they have the autism, they would not have the ability to take care of themselves, and as a whole, it will lead to the decrement of the highly gifted individual where they have higher IQs. It will lead to lowering of those who have like great IQs, something like that. And according to the Grandjean and Landrigan in 2014, they also stated that the lowering of IQs from this toxicant can lead to it can have like negative economic effects towards the society. It is because they further stated that each 1 IQ points that were lost will cause an average lifetime earnings of $8,000 in 2008 currencies. Imagine that, 1 IQ. Imagine if that person lost for about 30, how much that the economy of the country itself lost. So yeah, however, this epidemic and the increment of this neurodevelopmental disorder can also have its pros, which is in this case is a positive feed forward. Positive feed forward is basically let me explain it here. The more health problems emerge, there will be more researchers, and that will cause the government to give more funds to this research, and this will lead to more testing. So the negative emergence will lead to the positive ones. So this is what we call the positive feed forward. So by that we're just hoping that it is not hoping for more emergence of this health problems, but in this time we just hope that this increment can lead to more researches. So it is just like that. So back at it again. So is there a need for DNT testing? So think about DNT tests. Think about DNT tests. The what do we call it? There's only been less than 200 chemicals that has been tested, and that is roughly like 100 something chemicals. And most of this, from out of these less than 200 chemicals, most of them are like more into pesticides, and if the tests are conducted, they are rarely contribute to the regulations and the risk assessment that has been set up for the general guidelines. And plus, the thing about the anti-test is the endpoint. The endpoint or the result of the test is actually not very sensitive. It is not sensitive, and by that is it means like the result is like quite general and not very specific to it. And this kind of result we can't really determine whether it has this adverse effect towards the brain, whether that specific chemicals have the effects towards the brain, because because it's not sensitive. That's by saying so, it would very common for us to say that it is not applicable for the anti-test to be conducted in industries. Another thing about the anti-test is the government has not been set up a requirement for the anti-test to be conducted in every industry. So this is why, basically why the test is not included, and maybe only included if there is like sudden outbreak of it, or it have like this neurological effects towards the human when they consume the products or something like that. The D in the DNT stands for developmental. So we're focusing on the development of the human brain towards the effects of the chemical. So here, I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, it gives like permanent damage towards the ones exposed, especially towards the developing brains compared to the adult, where the effects are transient. Transient, it means like it is reversible. By that, it is because of they actually develop this blood-brain barrier, and that, for example, an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor may show transient neurotoxicity towards the adult, and this is fully reversible, unlike what occurs in developing brains of kids and children. They have this critical time of the development of the neurons, so they are highly sensitive towards toxic disruption, especially during the critical time. So this is why it affects more on the children. Plus, some concrete evidence concrete supporting details to support this point is children tends to do more. Basically, they are exposed to the heavier exposure towards this chemical, basically because they stated here by Landrigan et al. 2004. It stated that children in the first 6 months they tend to drink 7 times more than adult, and children from the age of 1 through 5 years they tend to eat 3 to 4 times more compared to the adults. And they resting infants, they breathe, and the air intake of them are like double the air intake of the adult. So these are the reasons why children have like heavier exposure compared to the adult.
Metabolic rate so mudah dan
Yeah. So basically the metabolic rate is
metabolic rate of infants or developing organisms is much higher than adult one.
So
Cakap lah. Sebabkan tu lah diorang lagi exposed terhadap chemicals, dia punya intake of outside substance tu lagi banyak.
So the metabolic rate of the infants and children are higher compared to adults. This is why the uptakes of the chemicals or exposure towards the chemicals is affected more on the children compared to the adults. So these are some of the reasons, and Another reasons such as like lack of DNT studies for most of the chemicals, since there have been less than 200 chemicals. The increase of the vulnerability of the developing brain towards the chemicals, and also the rising cases of this developmental disorder, what contributes of the need of the DNT testing in the field for the benefits of human. Okay, moving on. As for now, I would like to talk about, is it suitable to conduct an epidemiological studies on the neurodevelopmental disorder? As we all are well aware that epidemiological study is the study of to know how often a disease, for example in this case, which is the ASD, the autism spectrum disorder, occur, how often it occur in different groups of people, and why. Basically, the study rely heavily on the data that were retrieved from hospitals and stuff like that, and it usually took like a very long period of time, because in order to see the patterns, you need to like look as a whole in the human life cycle, like the time period of humans, of how they are able to live. And the thing about epidemiological study is it is reliable, but however it is time consuming. And there's this one fact that is stated that it took the epidemiologists to roughly about 50 years, which is 5 decades, to finally conclude that smoking can induce cancer. So just imagine that. To apply it into each of the chemical that we are about to test on these chemicals, it is just unimaginable. It would take like, it is just endless. And in epidemiological study there are two types, which is the retrospective and the prospective. In the retrospective study, it is actually the disease is more defined compared to the prospective. However, in selecting the control group, the results show that it is biased towards this particular group, and unlike prospective, which is in contrast, they are not biased, but somehow they needed the cause of it. They needed like extremely large study groups in order to do so, and lacks of data here and there makes it difficult to conduct prospective epidemiological study. So hi, now I'm actually in my room to continue on explaining more on this journal. So basically, as for now, I'm going to talk about the timeline, or the the timeline or the guidelines throughout the years of the guidelines of the DNT from back then and the improvement up until now. Okay, for your information, the systematic guideline of the DNT only been required and properly introduced in 1980s, during the 1980s. And here, with just that, even though there have been properly introduced, there are some widely used chemicals that are available in the industries that are still not going through this DNT test. And up until now, some of them are not routinely required from regulatory agencies. And they are only necessary if there's like sudden outbreak of the chemical somewhere, and that trigger that what that are triggered, or the sudden outbreak, or there are some trigger during the organ toxicity test. So these are only the reason when the DNT is conducted. So it's quite hard to be regulated in the regulatory agencies. So in 1998, which is the year I was born, US EPA stands for uh, Environmental Protection Agencies, and they are only this EPA is the regulations that where they revise and republish back the proper guidelines for the developmental neurotoxicity test. And in EPA, they focus more on pesticides or food that are using pesticides, because it is important because humans directly consume it, so they focus on that. And in 1995, there's another regulations, which is the OECD. OECD stands for Organization for Economics, Cooperation and Development. Here, the OECD, they developed their own test, which is the OECD test guide, where they'll be using the EPA template and improvise more on that. They also developed this test where it is called TG 443. TG stands for test guideline 443. So in this test guideline, they evaluate all developing stages of human life, for example, like ranging from prenatal, postnatal, puberty, and some can even go up to adulthood. So yeah, here they are more detailed. We can say that they are more detailed and specific, and they have like this specific endpoints. For example, like they want to look at the immune function, so they'll be focusing on that, and all these are done and conducted with the indication of the previous studies. And recently in 2007, another regulation is developed. So yeah, we can see the stepping up of this regulation, ranging from the firstly introduced EPA, OECD, and now it is REACH. REACH stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization and Restriction of Chemicals. REACH is first, they are introduced, the regulation is introduced in Europe, and their objective is basically they want to improve the protection of human health by doing earlier identification of the chemicals. Unlike the previous one where there's only sudden outbreak, in REACH they focus more on doing it before, prior from the any outbreak. You know what I mean? It's like you're doing beforehand, and how to do it, they any producers or investors, they need to go in Europe specifically at first, they need to go through this REACH testing, where any chemicals that they develop or produce, the volume is more than 1 ton per year, they need to go through this test. And if they and after going through the testing and they identified that the risks are unmanageable, it can be totally banned from being produced and being commercialized. So this is what basically REACH are for. Okay, next I would like to talk about the current, that one is like in 2007, but now is the current DNT test. Generally, the DNT studies or testing is conducted in vivo experiment where they use animals, where they use model organisms such as zebrafish, such as rats, but they are focusing more on rat mainly because I did some research online, and there's like this article that they stated that why researchers prefer rat to study uh, this DNT testing is because rat the homologous of rat with humans is because they share, we both give birth, we both are warm-blooded, uh, we share like similar organs, for example like kidneys, livers, and also we have similar nervous system, where we use the same hormone and also regulate the same body function. So these are some of the reason, and one of the most important thing is we both, humans and rats, we both have the same susceptible, we are both susceptible to similar disease. So when we are introduced to this specific disease, we both show or react in the same way. So yeah, this is like why researchers prefer more on rat compared to zebrafish. Zebrafish have their own advantages, but I would not cover on that. So yeah, moving on. The DNT that has been conducted now, they use approximately like around 1,000 rat pups. Rat pup is like the baby of the rat, and they needed a total of 140 mated females of the rat. So just imagine that 140 mated females in order to produce 1,000 rat pups. Why they need rat pups? Because they want to monitor more on the developing stage of the rat instead of the adult rat. And usually they are time consuming, mainly because they need to like breed this rat and wait for it to develop into these specific stages of life. So this is the reason why they are time consuming, and this does not belum include the testing lagi. So yeah, that is like quite the reason. And all in all, animal testing is good, and they are proven to give lots of benefits that contribute to the DNT test. But somehow we need to find another alternative, as there's usage of animal testing experiment is, or this strategy is very complex and expensive in terms of its labor, its time, and also the animal use. So to conclude about the DNT is, there's this one panel which is the PPR, which stands for Plant Protection Products and Their Residue. The PPR panel, this is a group of people that summarize the whole shortcoming of the DNT testing. Basically, they mention that DNT is not suitable to be tested for the chemicals, especially for high number of chemicals, as we all know that there are thousands of chemical out there that hasn't been tested yet. So since the method took like a long period of time, a period of 3 months, and they are time consuming, laborious, and all that for only one chemical, they assume that it is not appropriate to use this DNT and apply it on the regulatory guidelines for all the investors and the factories that produce this chemical. Although they are well designed, their endpoint are still doubtful and are still debatable. It is because For the testing, they use high doses of chemicals and test it on the model organism. And we all know that we human are generally exposed to low exposure of chemicals, for example, like lead that are present in the paint. So this kind of thing are like, even we have this specific data of that it shows adverse effect, but it is for the high dose, and we can't like bluntly apply it for the lower dose. And there still hasn't been studied that the low doses of chemicals causes this and this. So this is basically what they concluded. And yeah, the DNT guideline, the shortcoming is they are not suitable for high number of chemicals, and the human irrelevance of the data that are being retrieved.